Hi, welcome to Minutes with Mickey, a time for us to wonder about the story that we have entitled Athalia. This story can be found in 2 Kings chapters 8, 9, and 11 in various places, as well as 2 Chronicles chapters 21 through 23. There is a lot of material here, and I'm really encouraging you to go back into the text to take a look at it. I was sharing this story with my husband last night over dinner, and he said, "Hold it, time out. I'm feeling like I need a scorecard and a timeline." And he's right. There's a lot of detail in this particular story that can be very confusing. One of the first things that you might notice if you go back into the text, into 2 Chronicles chapter 21, is that you see that Elijah is sent a letter to Jehoshaphat's son Jehoram, condemning him for his kingship. And at this point, we have been spending an awful lot of time talking about Elisha as the prophet. So all of a sudden, interjecting Elijah, we're thinking, wait a minute, is this a misprint? Is this something wrong? Wait a minute, what's the timeline here? And so it is important to take a look at the timeline. So here's what I think what helped me is to realize that while 1st and 2nd Kings is generally chronological and 1st and 2nd Chronicles is generally chronological, they are not. 2nd Kings, 1st Chronicles does not follow 2nd Kings. They are both telling the same sets of stories. But also, once the kingdom's divided, what we see in the way these stories are written is there's a whole bunch of detail about what's happening in the northern kingdom. And then a chapter or two will show up saying, meanwhile, back in Judah, and all of a sudden the timeline will change and you will have gone forward in time in the Israel story. But then when we pick up Judah's story, we go back in time again in order to catch up. So that's what's happened here. I wondered about this so deeply, it was driving me nuts. And so I went in and looked at some commentaries, and no one seems to question that it was Elijah, because you see, if you read 2 Kings chapter 1, verses 16 through 18, it tells us that Joram began his ministry in the northern kingdom during the 2nd year of Jehoram's kingship in the southern kingdom. So it's very possible, since Joram took Ahab's place, Jehoram had already taken his father Jehoshaphat's place in the southern kingdom, and it wasn't until Joram took over after Ahab died that Elijah, who was the prophet to the northern kingdom, was taken into heaven. It was what we refer to as his translation. So that's where that overlap can come. Jehoshaphat is the one at the beginning of this story who makes the alliance with Ahab and make sure that his son, Jehoram, marries Ahab's daughter, which is Athalia, who's Athaliah. So this is where the problems for the southern kingdom really begin. And so if you take a look at the timeline, it does fit, and it does tell us in the text in 2 Chronicles that Jehoram received a letter from Elijah. So it's very possible by the time he actually got the letter, Elijah had been translated already. Why is it, the question becomes for me, why is it that Elijah felt compelled as the prophet to the northern kingdom, with all the details that are going on there with Elijah and Ahab, why is it that he felt it important to send a letter to the southern kingdom? It's been suggested that because of Jehoshaphat making this alliance with Ahab, that some of the evil that we knew that was a part of Ahab and Jezebel's reign was now going to filter in and begin to bleed over into Judah, which we see happening. And Elijah is certainly aware of what the damage that the marriage of Jezebel to Ahab did to the northern kingdom, and he is trying to warn and straight away say things to the southern kingdom so they don't fall into the same trap, and yet he puts this warning out to Jehoram. So here's my question. I know it's an awful lot of background, but here's my question. Jehoshaphat, when he was king, made this alliance with Ahab, and there's nothing in the text that tells us that God wanted him to do this. As a matter of fact, in First Kings, it's very clear that God was the one who designed, by the tearing of the robe of the prophet, remember, and giving those 10 pieces, giving 2 to one and 10 to the other, or those 12 pieces, that this was going to be, the kingdom was supposed to be divided, that God was going to do something with 2 separate kingdoms, and that was God's intention. Jehoshaphat went outside of what was God's plan and tried to find a way to bring the 2 kingdoms back together again, and it didn't help. And obviously, he had tried on several occasions, and one of them was this alliance of marriage. Athaliah was definitely Jehoram's downfall, because it was through her that Jehoram brought all the evil idols into the southern kingdom, and then he didn't reign long, and boom, he was killed. And then we have, very interestingly enough, we have his youngest son becoming king. And he decided to go up to Israel to have an alliance with his uncle, who was in power in Israel at the time. And that's when Jehu killed them both. So we've already had that story. So you see, this is kind of that backtracking thing. Then we see that Athaliah puts herself up into power. Who is it? What kind of woman is this? What kind of evil is this that allows someone to want to even kill their grandchildren? But what we see in this story is the wonderful opportunity that God provides grace by taking out one of these children, Joash. That the woman who decides to go and rescue one of these babies and takes them out brings this child up in the temple, so that when Joash is 7 years old, this child can be molded and understand what it is to be God's person and then to be a godly king. And we're going to have wonderful stories about Joash as we move forward. But here's the question I have. As you listen to this whole story, isn't it interesting that while Athaliah was queen or monarch, that no one crossed her? They were just in her evil reign. The minute that, even before Athaliah was killed, when Joash is set up to be king, they all say, yes, we will now follow God. And they went out and they got rid of all the idols. And my question was, couldn't they have done that sooner? What is it about people? What is it about us that just lets us just sort of go along with the crowd? So when the crowd goes the bad way, we all go the bad way. When the crowd goes the good way, we all go the good way. Where are the people that stand up for the right thing right away, in spite of everything? Because that's where God wants to use us. We're thankful for the way God intervenes into even his own history in order to keep bringing people back to himself. And we see this there. So there's 2 rather interesting questions. One, are we like Jehoshaphat and we step out and we try to figure out a way to fix things without talking to God first and without really following God's plan? And 2, have we been so swayed by the evil around us that we don't even realize that we're being taken in by it? And where is it that we need to stand and say, wait a second, my alliance is with God, the only God? Those are my thoughts. Get yourself a scorecard, get a timeline, and take a look at it, because this is a fascinating piece of history. What's God saying to you? Have a great week.